In this session, we will cover the Publish Triggers feature. Triggers can be applied on a page level, on a report level, or on the schedule level. Triggers are used to determine if a page, report, or schedule should be executed on a conditional basis. To see the report trigger in action, let's open a publication. We want to render a separate publication for each country, but we only want the publication to be rendered if the sales amount is greater than $200,000. We will start by adding the country slicer to the publication. Next, we will use the trigger to define our condition that will determine if the report will be published for each element of the slicer. Click the Report Trigger Manager button from the publication ribbon, then check the Use Trigger checkbox. You can decide whether to use the trigger if the condition is met, true, or if the condition is not met, false. Then click on the new condition to configure it in the Create Condition dialog box. The trigger condition contains 4 fields that must be entered, 2 fields that will be compared with one another, an operator, and a comparison type. The first field must contain a dynamic function, so we will find the relevant grid in the content tree. We only want to render the report if the sales total is greater than $200,000. Click on the sales value. It will be automatically added to the formula window. Now let's select the operator. This can be numeric, equals, greater than, less than, etc., or textual, starts with, contains, does not contain, etc. We will select greater than. For the comparison type, you must compare it to a static value, a dynamic function, or to the last updated value before adding the second field. We will select a static value of $200,000 in the second field. If required, a dynamic formula could also be used to define this. Very often users want to compare the amount to the amount produced the previous time that this schedule was run. This option allows you to do the comparison automatically. Simply select Compare to last updated value. But we will use our comparison to $200,000. Then test the condition and set it. Without clicking on Set Formula, nothing will happen. Now that we have built the condition, we click the Apply button. The condition now appears here. If required, we can add multiple conditions by clicking the New Condition button again. Here we will add a condition that sales must be less than $500,000. Then we can choose either and or all. Now the conditional trigger has been created, we can apply the trigger to the slicer elements by marking the checkbox. Then we will minimize the dialog box, save the presentation, and create a new schedule by clicking on the Schedule button from the presentation ribbon. From the selection panel, we will choose the slice that should be used when the report is triggered. You may select either basic or multiple. Now let's select all items for country, then save and run. Then we go to the schedule listing. Only USA and Australia finished. The others stopped after the report trigger evaluation as they did not meet the trigger criteria. That means the report will only be rendered for the USA and Australia. Page triggers are used to determine if a page should be rendered or not. There's a page repeater on this page that uses a slicer to repeat it for each product category. We want to create a condition that will only render the page if the product category has a net margin less than 24.5%. So we go to the page for which we want to create the trigger. From the Page tab, we click on the Page Trigger Manager. Here we see the trigger that will be created for page 2. Check the Use Trigger option and click on Add New Condition button. Next, we configure the condition where the net margin is less than 24.5%. And we apply the trigger to the product category slicer. Next, we will save the report and schedule it for all items. Then we run the report and go to the schedule listing. Here we download the report for Australia and see that separate pages will be rendered for accessories, bikes and components as their net margins are all less than 24.5%. But the report for the USA only displays bikes, as the other product categories do not meet this condition. And finally, the schedule trigger is used to evaluate if the schedule is to be run or not. They too are configured in the same way report triggers are, but the relationship between the slicer and the trigger is defined in the trigger launch panel of the publication. In this example, I will create a condition that checks if global sales is less than $2 million. If the amount is greater than that, then the schedule won't run at all. And now when we run the schedule, we see that it'll fail as it doesn't meet the trigger condition. When we increase the amount to $10 million, the schedule runs as it meets the trigger condition.